Welcome to the Marconi Project, an oral history series of the Italian American Museum of Washington, D.C. In these interviews, we capture the memories and experiences of Italian immigrants and Italian Americans in the nation's capital. We are ready to hear your story.
We are recording an interview with Cecilia Fiermonte on March 10th, 2024. Cecilia,
yes.
Tell us a little bit. Where were you born? Where's your family from?
So I was born in Rochester, New York. Do you need the year?
No.
Good. I was born in Rochester, New York. My parents were Italian immigrants. They were from the same small town in Italy, Casamassima, Provincia di Bari. So Bari is both a city and a province, just like New York is a state and a city in Puglia. So Bari is maybe 20 minutes by car from Casamassima.
Okay. And what about your grandparents? Also
From the same small town. I know that's very rare. All from the same small town, just blocks away. My parents knew each other growing up. And my mother had a crush on my father's brother, but ended up marrying him instead.
Okay. What did your parents tell you about World War II? Can you tell us a little about your father walking back from the Russian front where he was sent to fight and walking back all the way to Puglia?
Yeah, my father was only 17 years old when he was drafted into World War II and fought in some brutal battles, including a famous battle where he was sent up to Russia. And he used to talk about this when I was a child, but I didn't realize the gravity of it or how famous this battle was. But he used to say, we were boys from southern Italy, and the snow was over our head. He said, and then they say that Mussolini knew that they were going to die, and he sent them anyway. Now, my father was in the elite corps, which was called the Alpini. He was an Alpino. He was a very big, strong, athletic. They used to pick the best, and so there was a lot of controversy at the time about Mussolini sending his best up to Russia to die. And my father used to talk about how he saw all his friends die right in front of him. The troops all got separated, and he had to walk back to Italy. And he used to say, the only thing that kept me alive was I kept thinking of my mother. I wanted to go back and see my mother's face one more time. And he walked back to Italy. At one point, he was captured by the Germans. They spared him because this is his version of the story, but he says because he was so big and strong, they figured he'd be useful. And things like that. They said, oh, this is a nice, strong Italian man. He should be spared. And so the Germans spared him, but he used to talk about how once for 30 days he had nothing to eat, nothing to eat at all.
So he finally made it back to Puglia.
He finally made it back to Puglia and found out that his mother was dead. And he said he was so strong throughout the whole war, every battle, everything he suffered. But when he got back and found out that his mother was dead, that's when he had a breakdown, the post-traumatic stress. He used to talk about the nightmares, and his father had already remarried, so he had no place to live.
Oh, my goodness. I guess that was the tradition in those days. The men remarried.
They needed someone to take care of them. I think my grandfather had some blindness too, so he probably did need someone to take care of him. And my father's whole military pension, they had declared him dead, and so his whole military salary, not pension, his whole military salary went to his brother, who had 5 kids, and his brother had spent it all, so my father had no money, no place to live. His mother was dead. So after surviving all of that, that's what he came back to. Yeah. So,
but he eventually ended up here in Rochester, right?
Well, that's kind of a long story. So the Italian government did reward these men who survived this brutal battle because it was understood Mussolini did the wrong thing, or a bad thing, or however you want to say it. They decided to reward the few survivors there were from this battle. And they gave my father a great position up in Milan. So my parents were living in Milan, and my father loved it. My father was an opera fan. When he was 10 years old, he used to get on his bike and he used to ride his bike to the Teatro Petruzzello. Petruzzelli. I always get that wrong because we have relatives. Okay, Petruzzelli. And he would do hard manual labor because he was so big and strong. They would open the door and let him watch opera for 10 minutes or so. But that's how much he loved opera. So he loved being in Milan because being a military officer was sort of the same thing. They would let him into La Scala. He could watch some opera. And he loved Milan. It was easier for him. My mother had a hard time in Milan. She used to say that Milanese just cannot stand the Southern Italians. And she was a simple girl from a small town. And she said the Milanese were just brutal. And she just hated it. So there was this tension. So in the meantime, my mother had an aunt in Rochester, New York. And she would write to the family back home in Casamassima. And she would say, America's wonderful. The streets are paved with gold. Everybody's rich. Everybody's happy. So my mother got in her mind America would be better than Milan. My father was not convinced. He didn't have family in Rochester. But she convinced him. And so they ended up moving to Rochester. Years later, I found out that the aunt who was writing those letters about how much she loved living in Rochester, her daughter told me she used to cry every night because she wanted to go back to Italy. And the only reason she wrote those letters was not to worry her family, to make them think that she was okay and happy, when in fact she was crying every night because she missed Italy so much. And that probably is not unusual for immigrants. For sure. But I just want to say the only reason I understood the battle my father fought in Russia, the only reason I had context for it, because as a child I did not. I learned American history in school, not Italian history, was because when I came to the Church of Holy Rosary in D.C. and it was in the Casa Italiana, I just happened to be speaking with Antonio Bianchini and some of the other men, and they were talking about the Alpini. And I said, my father was an Alpino. And they said, no, it can't be. I said, yeah. They said, bring in a picture. We'll tell you if it's true. So I brought in the photo of my father with the feather in his hat. And they said, yes, your father was an Alpino. I said, yes, he fought in Russia. And so Antonio Bianchini was the one who gave me a little more context about that battle. And he actually brought in a book for me to read, which was all in Italian. And I never got a chance to read it, but I have the name of the book, and someday, maybe when I retire, I'm going to read that book just to learn more about. It was actually here that I got the context for what happened.
Okay, so what language did your family predominantly speak? And what about your parents' dialect or Italian?
Oh, my goodness. We used to speak such a mishmash of things. We used to speak a lot of dialect. My father wanted us to learn proper Italian. So if I said something in dialect, then he would repeat it in proper Italian so that we would also learn the proper Italian. And then it was mixed in with English. Because when it was easier to use English, we used English. If something was better, and I don't know, I actually participated. I met somebody through Holy Rosary, was doing a PhD in linguistics, and she said it's called code switching, that there actually is a formula for when you switch back and forth, but most people just do it subconsciously, so I think that's how it was in our family. But I used to hear my parents speaking the dialect, so I learned the dialect of their town, and when I would go back to Italy, my cousins would laugh because the young people didn't learn the dialect, and they would say, you're American, and you speak this crazy dialect, and we were born here, and we don't even understand this. We don't, because in Italy then it became improper to teach your children the dialect at some point. They might know some words, but they wanted their children to learn correct Italian, and so they pulled back from the dialect. But my cousin said to me, you sound like our grandparents speaking the old dialect.
I know your Italian must be pretty good, because I was here once when somebody from the Embassy of Italy complimented you on your Italian.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Years ago.
Thank you. Yeah, no, they say in Italian autodidatta, so I taught a lot of it myself. But, yeah, I mean, we spent long periods of time in Italy.
Yeah. Didn't you spend summers?
We spent some long summers there, like 6 months. My So kind of an interesting story that goes to American history. But my father was a member of the Italian American Club in Rochester, New York. And, you know, there were race riots and race tensions in the 60s and 70s. And one night when he was leaving the club, 3 black men jumped him and beat him and left him for dead and left his wallet in place just to show that, you know, we're beating you because you are Italian. And my father took that really hard. I mean, he was in the hospital for months, and the doctor said most men would have died from that beating. My father said, we're leaving, we're going back to Italy. So he had the intention to go back to Italy. They were looking for property in Italy, and they were taking us back for long periods of time. So we would get used to being in Italy, and we would relocate to Italy. And I was sort of warming up to the idea. You know, I had made friends in Italy. I loved Italy, you know, but then I would miss, you know, when I was here, I would miss Italy. When I was in Italy, I would miss here. But in the end, my sister, my oldest sister, who was 15 years older than me, she got married quickly and had 2 children quickly, and then my parents decided they couldn't leave their grandchildren. So we never did move back to Italy, but my father went every summer until he was 80 years old.
So how did you end up in Washington?
So I'm an attorney, and I was head of the family court program in Wyoming County in New York State, and I met some people from the American Bar Association Center on Children and the Law in D.C., and I thought it would be very exciting to come to Washington and work in policy. And I had done a project for them that they were happy with. And so I knew I had a good chance of getting the job, and I did. And so I came here to work in policy.
Okay, but at some point you switched to international finance. Can you tell us about the work you did with the Guardia di Finanza?
Yeah, so my nephew needed help with his kids up in Rochester, and so I needed to find work that was more flexible. So I started working as a contractor for various law firms. And I, because I speak Italian, and I also, I used to be pretty good in French, and then I don't speak French too well, but I can still read it. It's actually very close to Italian. And so I would get projects in Italian or French, and so I got some projects in money laundering. I got to do a project involving the Vatican, which was interesting. And through that, I met, I guess he's a general, Antonio Leone, at the embassy in D.C., and I decided it would be interesting to write. I actually majored in art and art history before I went to law school, so it's always kind of a passion of mine. So this idea of how money gets laundered through art was interesting to me. And so through my contacts, you know, through this work, money laundering work that I was doing, I had gone to some conferences and meetings, and somebody asked me to write an article, and I thought that would be an interesting topic. So I collaborated with General Leone, and he set me up with some people. I did some interviews with some members of the Guardia di Finanza in Rome, and it was a lot of fun. It was published. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Good. And your work as an attorney involves, I think, some translations to or from Italian. Is that correct? Basically. Not always word-for-word translations, but, for instance, if attorneys were preparing a litigation and they needed to be told which documents are worth translating, part of that was even just the beginning of that, just telling them what was important. Or they would say, we're looking for this issue. Can you tell us what documents would pertain to this or that issue? So you would have to read the documents and pull them out. That's pretty interesting. You go from international finance and money laundering to art history. And that reminds me, you mentioned Antonio Bianchini, our late parishioner, the mosaicist, whose work is in, actually, our Italian-American Museum.
Yes, he was so talented.
Tell us about the time that you gave a lecture with Antonio. I believe it was the Sons of Italy in Fairfax, and you showed the video of the pizzica dancing.
Memory. Yeah, so I just, when I would visit Italy, mostly I would hang out with my cousins. which was fun, great fun. Sure. But I decided I wanted to do a full tour of Puglia, south to north. So I did this beautiful tour in 2007. So I went to San Giovanni Rotondo in the north, Viesse, Peschici, Castel del Monte. I wanted to see everything. Lecce. I saw a lot. Maybe not everything because there's so much to see in Puglia, but I saw a lot. I hit the highlights, and I was so excited. And when I came back here, I got introduced to this church, and they were doing the Festa Italiana, and the region happened to be Puglia that they were featuring. So I came onto the board of the Festa Italiana and worked on that. So anyway, I started meeting people here at the church, and one of the people I met was Antonio, and you, of course, Nancy. And so we did that talk, and I was fresh from that trip, and I actually wrote some materials for the Festa Italiana on Puglia. So I came back here. I wrote a lot of notes while I was touring Puglia, and then I also did some research. I brought back books. In fact, I remember my cousin had to help me because I had to go to the post office, and I mailed myself back this huge package of books that I could read when I got back. So I was just trying to learn as much as I could, and it was so fun to do that lecture, just share what I know. Because, back in the day when people would say, where's your family from, they would think I would say Sicily or, something where a lot of Italian Americans are from. And I would say, I'm from Puglia, Bari. They'd say, what? What the heck? They'd never heard of Puglia, because it's only recently that Puglia has become popular for Americans. We always had German tourists, British tourists, but we never had American tourists until, not too long ago.
Some famous celebrities had weddings there.
Yeah.
And that helped Puglia become better known.
Right. It kind of cracks me up. And the region has done a great job with their tourism. But so I just wanted to share about Puglia because it's not known. It used to be known as a cultural backwater just because of ignorance. People didn't know. And so I loved sharing about, Castel del Monte, San Giovanni Rotondo, Lecce, Bari, the cathedral, the basilica, everything. I just loved sharing that. So, and then Antonio spoke with us. And he did a section on how he does his beautiful mosaics.
I remember he told us there's a quick and easy way, and then there's his way that he learned in Ravenna and so on.
Oh, yeah.
You use some cheap glue and the thing falls apart in the rain. Or
Right.
you could do it the way he does it, and you've got a beautiful work of art.
It was fascinating how painstaking.
Yeah.
And I, having studied art, I'm still in awe. I mean, with paint, you can easily slap it down. Well, not easily. There's a lot involved in painting, but you can manipulate so easily. But when you're putting a stone down so precisely, it has to be so precise. And he was so talented. And I remember he did a mosaic of a trullo, which are the little houses in Alberobello, which are in Puglia. And it was so beautiful.
The picture of your parents was taken.
My father had a good friend who owned a farm in Alberobello. And my cousin just told me a few years ago, he's my mother's cousin, I guess. We just say cousin for everybody. Anyone you're related to is a cousin in Italy. And he said to me, oh, yeah, when your mom and dad wanted to get away, have a romantic tryst, they used to go to Alberobello. They used to go visit his friend. So that was one of their romantic day trips, I guess, to Alberobello.
By the way, G7 is going to have their summit meeting in Puglia in June.
What?
So the eyes of the world will be on Puglia, right?
That's
just
crazy
a few months
to
from
me.
now.
That's
3 months.
crazy to me when you think of, when I was growing up, nobody even knew what that was.
Yeah, they will after June, I think, the world.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's funny.
That's quite a big deal.
Mm-hmm. No, it
all
is
the world leaders and
it is a big
all the
deal.
press.
It is a big deal, and I'm happy that Puglia has done so much, especially Bari. Because, Bari, as we were just talking about, Nancy, used to be a drug port, basically, and they cleaned it up, and now it's just beautiful. And, there's restaurants, art galleries, and, of course, the beautiful cathedral and basilica of San Nicola is just amazing to see. So it's wonderful that they cleaned it up, and it's a wonderful place for tourists. And, I brought my godson there in 2017, and you know what he said? Now, he's an American. My godson is American. He's just got a quarter Pugliese blood. He's half Polish, a quarter. His other grandmother was from near Naples. So he's not much from Puglia. So, he had no no bias, let's say. But he said, this place is so beautiful. He said, this city is as beautiful as Paris. So it was interesting to hear an American say that about Bari.
The last time I was in Bari, I was on the Lungomare, and I was told, I guess this is true, that 1 million cruise ship passengers passed through Bari in a year.
Oh, I believe that. Because, well, back in the day when nobody knew what Bari was, the few people who knew, they used to say, I passed through there to get to Greece. That's all it was a passing. Nobody stopped. It was just a way to get to Greece. It was always a busy port. The history of it was important, actually, especially during the Middle Ages, and that's why there are these beautiful cathedrals all along the coast. And I read when I was doing the historical research, for instance, there's the cathedral at Trani, which is not too far from Bari. It's right on the water, and it's stunning, and it overlooks the water. And they say that the reason they built these cathedrals right on the water was to warn them, because Bari was always being raided by the Muslims, being on the east, and there were, brutal raids. They used to come over, sack the churches. They used to kill all the monks or the priests and even the parishioners. And, Puglia was really brutalized. And they say the reason, Otranto, yes, it's important. That was an important event. And But they used to build these beautiful cathedrals right on the water as sort of a warning to say we will die for our faith. So they were real symbols of faith. So it's interesting. It's not just a church. It was like a battle they were fighting.
What's your relation with Italy now? Do you travel back and forth nowadays, or what things do you miss about Italy when you're here, and what things do you miss about America when you're in Italy?
I don't get to go as often as I would like. My father was sick for 5 years. I helped my nephew with his children for many years. I still do. They're 15, so I still drive them around, take them out. My mother now is elderly, so I have a lot of responsibilities here. In fact, I go back and forth between Washington and Rochester, New York a lot, and then to add Italy to the mix is a lot. But I miss it a lot. In fact, I was saying just last night, I was just on my iPad just looking at Bari and just getting that feeling like I want to go back. And, I'll tell you, what I miss the most is what we call la vita sociale. In Italy, we would just, especially my parents' small town, it would amaze me because I would be walking down the street and people would say, hey, aren't you Stefano's daughter? Aren't you? Hey, I used to hang out with your father. If I walk around Washington, nobody knows who I am. Even if I walk around Rochester, New York, nobody knows who I am. But I walk around their town, and we all know each other. My cousin knows your cousin, and everybody knows each other. And at night, every single night, we're in the piazza, at least when the weather's nice. Yeah. We're in the piazza, just grabbing something to drink, talking. It was not a life lived in front of screens. Yeah. So it's interesting just contrasting that with now where, we can spend a whole evening and it's kind of wasted time just in front of a screen. Absolutely. Even if you're learning something, it's people here are much more isolated. But probably it's becoming more modernized in Italy, too. I know they have that problem there, too. But I do, when I think of the absolute, if I could just grab one thing from Italy, to have again or to bring it here, it would just be that sense of just being outside at night and socializing, not having to do anything. We used to call fare una passeggiata. We would walk and walk and walk. No wonder they're so much thinner, too. We would walk all night long.
We call it people watching.
Exactly. Exactly. So, you have a little bit more of that in the bigger cities, but certainly like in Rochester, New York, you don't see a lot of that.
I would like to ask you, what's your relationship with Holy Rosary and Casa Italiana community? And what does it mean to you in terms of spiritual things, relationships, and so on?
Oh, my goodness. I was kind of struggling spiritually when I first got to Washington because I just never warmed up to my local church in Alexandria, Virginia. And I wasn't really, honestly going to church that much. I wasn't a very good Catholic. And I honestly think Padre Pio was the one who, after I visited the tomb of Padre Pio in 2007, as soon as I got back, a girl I used to work with called me. It's kind of a long, involved story, but anyway, she ended up introducing me to a friend of hers who was whose family were longtime members of Holy Rosary, and she said, "You must go to the Italian church." And I said, "What Italian church? I didn't even know there was an Italian church here in Washington." And she said, "Well, you have to come with me, 10:30 Sunday." And we came here, and I just loved it, and I picked up a bulletin, and it was so funny because the Washington Post happened to be at Holy Rosary that day. I don't know, they were doing a story on local churches or something, and she said, "Look at that, you finally came to Mass at the Italian church in the Washington Post." And there was a picture, you could just see the back of our heads, but we were actually in the Washington Post. So I grabbed that bulletin. It said, "We are looking for volunteers for the Festa Italiana. The featured region is Puglia." And I said, "Oh my goodness, I can help these people," because that's when I was going through my phase where I just wanted to learn everything I could about the history and the culture of Puglia. So I wrote some articles for them and just got very involved in the Festa Italiana. I used to sit in the Casa Italiana and sell raffle tickets, and I thought, I found my home. And after that, that's a long spiritual story, but many graces flowed from that. I became a much more fervent Catholic, and since then I much more, I come to Mass every Sunday. I partake in the sacraments, and it just became my spirit. It just felt really like a home. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Cecilia. This was a wonderful interview. And you were interviewed by me, Nancy DeSanti, and you were recorded by Giovanni Scianameo.
Also from Puglia?
Yes.
From Body?
From Body. What could be better, right? Okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Nancy and Giovanni.